When you look in the New Testament, you see the word disciple mentioned about 269 times. Just by way of comparison, you see the word Christian mentioned 3 times. Disciple is mentioned over and over and over again. What is a disciple? Now, when the New Testament talks about disciples, it talks about disciples in different ways. I want you to see 3 main categories. First of all, when the New Testament, you see the New Testament talk about disciples, sometimes it's referring to a casual listener. A casual listener. People who are in the crowds following Jesus, listening to what he is saying. A casual listener. Then you take a step deeper and you see some people referred to as disciples more along the lines of being convinced listeners. And by that I mean they're not just casually listening. There's some buy-in there. Okay, I believe what this guy is saying. I'm embracing what he's saying. I'm convinced. He is who he says he is. And so you've got convinced listeners. And then you've got a deeper level. Beyond that, not just casual or convinced listeners, but you've got a committed lifelong learner and follower described as a disciple in the New Testament. What's interesting is that in the New Testament, when we see all these references to disciples, the greatest number of people that are called disciples fall into one of those first 2 categories. Either casual listeners or convinced listeners. Thousands of people that would follow Christ. Many that had some buy-in. But when you take that 3rd step and you get to committed lifelong learners and followers, the group gets really, really small. For example, in Acts chapter 1, verse 15, all it says is that after Jesus had left this life on earth, ascended into heaven, there's only 120 people that are left. Now, thousands of people had followed him during his life here, but only 120 people that are actually doing what he told them to do, committed lifelong learners and followers. Now, that's the picture in the New Testament. Let's take a step back. Let me ask you a question. Where do you think the largest number of people in the church, particularly in the Western world, fall into when it comes to these categories? I'm guessing the first 2. That I can say with pretty good confidence that the majority, the multitudes, even who might call themselves Christians, when it comes to this word disciples, would probably be classified as either casual listeners who, okay, I can go along with this Jesus and the church thing, or probably even more so, particularly in our culture here in the Southeast, convinced listeners. A lot of people in our church culture that have buy-in. Yeah, I believe Jesus is who he says he is. I believe this is true. And are content to go on living the Christian life as a convinced listener. But when you get to this idea of a committed lifelong learner and follower, you take a step much deeper. And the number gets a lot smaller. And I believe we've created a situation where we've created discipleship to be optional in the church. What it means to follow Jesus, really, truly, at its core, the deep foundations of what that means. That's relegated for the super Christian. Disciple making, that's only a few over here. And we've made it possible. We've created an atmosphere where it is okay to become a Christian but not a disciple. We've relegated discipleship, really following Christ in radical devotion, over here. And it's possible to be a Christian and have absolutely no progress in or toward discipleship in our lives. And I think that's a problem biblically. And I'm convinced when it comes to the need in the church today, because that picture is reflected in the stagnancy and spiritual weakness of the church across the Western world. I'm convinced that the need in the church today is not more money, it's not more power, it's not more prestige, it's not even more people, it's not more education, it's not more political influence. I believe the greatest need in the church today is more men and women and students who have believed in Jesus Christ, embraced him, to rise up and be the disciples that the Scripture teaches us to be. I'm convinced it's not only the greatest need in the church, I think it's the greatest need in the world.